Hello, everybody. This is Sarah Colada with Architecture Talk Tang. Back again today with a new episode. My guest is Theo Dounas. Theo is the founder of ArchiDAO community, which is a community of architects that are working with the blockchain technology and decentralized means of not only collaborating on designs, but also, of course, looking into the future of design, which is all digital and much more. It has to do also with politics and decision making and even fair pay and a lot of other things. In fact, it's a big topic. It's almost like a new, I would say, a new structure like democracy used to be, right? A new structure in the system that we can create online. And that's what that freedom has been enabled for us through the crypto technology that has obviously in the last years been disrupting all markets. And today we're going to talk a little bit about decentralized communities for architects and what that really means for architecture, for our projects, for the economy, and what's the potential there. So, Theo, thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast.
Thank you for the invitation, and it's always exciting to talk about our work with ArchiDAO, but also the opportunity that blockchain technologies can bring to architects, and how that kind of changes the way we produce architecture.
Exactly. That's wonderful. Actually, I wanted to perhaps before we deep dive into the source of this meeting, find out a little bit about you and ArchiDAO. So why don't you just take a moment to explain to us sort of the concept of ArchiDAO, what is ArchiDAO, and also how you came about to fund this incredible project?
Right. So the full name of ArchiDAO is an Architecture Decentralized Autonomous Organization, right? So what does that mean essentially? Essentially, it's an organization that at its core uses blockchain technologies and smart contracts for operations, for decision making, and for production. Now, the story of how I got involved in this goes a little bit back to the days I was in China working for Segatong Liverpool University and setting up their innovation hub. And one of the technologies that we looked into as having an impact in the next 10 to 20 years was essentially blockchain, the technology that is behind Bitcoin and Ethereum. And one of the kind of fundamental applications that blockchain allows you to do is to provide possession and ownership of digital assets on this decentralized network called the blockchain. Essentially 5 years ago, we started looking into integrating smart contracts and blockchains into digital design tools that architects use from a research perspective. I've published extensively on this as a researcher, and we've also built some of the first prototypes that allow you to control digital design tools through tokens on the blockchain and vice versa. And these arrive at a spectrum from being able to record and represent buildings on the blockchain that allows you then to create kind of an infrastructure for a circular economy, to recording decisions in a combination of let's say technocracy and democracy, or a mix of the two, if you will. And from that perspective, you have the possibility to create let's say modes of production of architecture that stakeholders and architects have much more equity on. And fast forward to, let's say, the end of 2021, where along with 10 other people who are enthusiastic on blockchain, we kind of decided to start ArchiDAO. We gathered together, and then the past year, all of 2022, essentially, we have been community building and starting to focus essentially on, I would say, three things. One is developing products for architects on blockchain technologies, right? So kind of core product of ArchiDAO will be a series of smart contracts that help architects collaborate. Experimenting with metaverse and education on the metaverse, because there was a lot of hype, but it was very difficult sometimes for people to understand where to get information. And then also looking at essentially creating the main infrastructure of how the organization works, right? So, we're building a series of NFTs that provide membership. These act as IDs, and you can imagine that this acts as a kind of your special architectural license on the blockchain, right? So whatever you do in terms of experience or contributing to a project can be recorded, and that can then give you certain rights on future projects later on. At the moment, ArchiDAO is about 40 members that have expressed interest of becoming full members. We have about 400 people on Discord jumping in and out and helping us with various other aspects, but we're also looking to grow. So if anybody's interested, you don't have to be an architect, right? Any kind of involvement in the architecture, engineering, construction community will be useful. And keep your eyes on the Discord for our calls, for community calls, and exciting content for the next 2 months.
Exactly. This is actually the Discord link, guys. If you're watching, please write it down, join. But before we go to sort of discussing a little bit more about it, I wanted to sort of take a step back and dissect it a little bit, because what I find, and I'm certainly, even though I've been like interested in these topics of metaverse for about a year now, I still get really lost with terminology. There is a lot of new words, and if you're not fully in the papers, understanding exactly, the research papers, understanding exactly what means what, it's a little bit confusing. Additionally to that, of course, the whole system is set on sets of principles that don't translate well to the real life scenario. They're very specific to the technology of Bitcoin and the crypto technology. So therefore, if one is not familiar because has, I don't know, perhaps never bought an investment in Bitcoin or whatever, just the whole concept is very new. So I wanted to ask you specifically about smart contract. Would you help us understand what a smart contract is, so that therefore we can understand a little bit better the implication of it for an architect or an architecture practice? Because it's quite revolutionary what it can do. But to understand the concept fundamentally, it takes that level of understanding. So perhaps we can go there.
Yeah. So let's start with, to understand essentially what a smart contract is, we need to first understand what a blockchain is. And essentially a blockchain is a distributed network of computers that hold together a decentralized ledger, right? So that's a ledger of transactions, say additions and subtractions. If I buy a coffee from you, we instruct the blockchain to say, remove $2 from Theo's account and add them to Sarah's account, right? So essentially, that's how Bitcoin works on a very, very, very simple basis. Now, if you have subtraction and addition, you have basic mathematical operations. And if you have basic mathematical operations, you can program the computer, right? So imagine that you can run whole software onto the blockchain, and it can have the same kind of automation as you would have in the physical world with an automated vending machine, right? So if I put $2 on the vending machine and I want a Mars bar, it's going to give me the Mars bar. So a smart contract essentially is a piece of code that gets executed on the blockchain, and every time it gets executed, you get a guaranteed result, right? So it's going to be the same every time. And it's also autonomous in the sense that you don't need a human to intervene to activate essentially the code, right? So there are certain conditions that once met, trigger the code, trigger the software, and that is a guaranteed result. Now, let's kind of translate this on what does that mean in real life, right? Let's take a construction project. And, in construction projects, you have contracts, and you might have a clause in a contract that says, you're going to get paid as soon as we verify that certain operations on a construction site have taken place. Now, that introduces a potential delay because you need to have a verifier that will go on site, measure things, they need to survey, right? Has this happened according to spec? And then issue a command for payment, and this needs to go to the bank, right? So you might get a delay from 2 weeks to 8 weeks. Now, if you're a constructor or an architect working on that project, you need to have essentially 8 weeks of cash to handle that process. With a smart contract, you can essentially connect and jerry-rig a series of software that will do that for you, And as soon as you complete a project, or whether that's a design project or a construction project, the payment is immediate, and the money gets transferred from your account from the client's account to your account. So if you will, in a sense, the much more easiest thing to kind of explain is that it can help you with automating payments. But beyond payments, it can also help you with transparency on a project. It can help you with keeping track of where materials come from. It can help you with, so that's supply chain traceability, but also it can help you with creating what we might call a decentralized governance, right? So essentially allowing people to make collective decisions about a project with all of the decisions locked on the blockchain.
So this is fascinating. So how would the software be able to verify that indeed on the construction site certain things took place and they were done correctly and to a client's liking? So let's just say that, you know, a delivery of a construction is not just finished when the building is done. Sometimes there are discrepancies. You said in the plan that the window was going to be bigger. In reality, it was built smaller or too close to the column, or you know, there are some things like that, or maybe there is a missing. So how do you, you know, how maybe there is a missing electric wire that was supposed to be connected here for whatever purpose. So how do you ensure that transparency that you were talking about, exactly the ability to say indeed it is to the expectation, and indeed it's you know, the sort of the client, the person that was executing the project did it correctly and did it, you know, and did it thoroughly. In that way.
So you need a second, you need a second or a third essentially piece in the whole puzzle, and that what is called an oracle in blockchain terms, right? So you need an information provider that will verify essentially whether certain things have taken place. So the blockchain does not take care of everything, but you would need either an automatic way to verify information. So researchers so far have done this either through the use of machine learning and AI, right? So you have essentially a camera verifying whether something is close to spec or not. And also you need to have a very careful setup in terms of specifications. So the whole work starts from the design point of view. So a lot of discrepancies in design and construction comes from not specifying things
correctly to the expectations at the beginning, basically.
Exactly, right? So you don't have the clear expectations, right? The client thinks of one thing, the architect thinks of another, the construction thinks of a third, right? So a lot of the kind of processes that we're touching are inherently building information modeling processes, but let's say taking BIM on steroids in terms of what it can do from the beginning.
But thankfully to this software, we can actually establish parameters of expectations early on that can match to the ability to verify the smart contract later, right?
Exactly.
So basically we have the technology already within the AEC in order to be able to plug in a smart contract and to make it work without having to verify it and make it a complicated process. Using big technology in combination with smart contracts, it actually can be already a system that eventually can become flawless with a little bit more of education of the system, right?
Exactly. I think at the moment we have the technology to automate certain aspects of the pipeline delivery in AEC projects. However, what we are envisioning is for the future goes beyond that and goes on to the level of dealing with the AC industry and AC projects more towards the way the US industry works with integrated project delivery, or understanding a project as a common pool resource problem, rather than something where I go in as an architect, I provide the services, and then I am out of the picture, right? So a lot of the problems that we have sometimes are due to having a really wide range of fragmentation in AC projects. So blockchain can provide, let's say, the connective tissue that allows us to work stigmergically, where we understand every time what needs to happen when, but also in a way where everybody has equity on the project and can provide sound and good governance in terms of decision making.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit more, because
Mm-hmm.
that's a very interesting element of building teams and communities, but also actually for management of an office. I imagine, within a normal setup, you have people in positions of leadership or otherwise within a certain set of responsibilities, and everyone is responsible for fulfilling their own tasks on the role in order to make a project happen. So therefore, we all have quite clearly defined tasks and roles, as team members. I'm guessing that all of that translates perfectly towards the digital management system or software in this sort of systems. And it can get verified based on skill sets, right? So people's skill set,
No,
people's
not
okay, go on.
output. Yeah, not exactly, right? So we don't have. I mean, uh, again, it depends on what kind of governance you will decide to have, right? So you might have, for example, a very hierarchical system, right? So architecture companies tend to use a very 18th century kind of model, right?
That's
Master and apprentice, right? So you have someone who is more knowledgeable. They've been around the block sometimes, right? They've made many mistakes, right? And usually they're there to avoid, to guarantee output and avoid major issues.
mm-hmm.
And a lot of time, leadership also doesn't really directly participate in design, but they act more as filters essentially of design activity, right? So they act as yardsticks of quality. They say, well, this is what you need to do, right? And you need to be at this point. And then there is a kind of project management based understanding where younger members of staff actually produce or bring ideas to the table, right? We kind of have modeled many different kind of ways to understand this, right? So one is a very democratic way where everybody has a say, but at the same time, even in a democracy, you can't really ignore, or you shouldn't, right? I mean, this is where we go into the politics and governance of it. You shouldn't ignore someone with experience, right? So how does their vote, if we're all voting for a decision-making approach, how does the vote of an experienced member of staff count, right? So you start going into having a way of weighting votes, right, and based on experience. Now, part of what we're trying to do in ArchiDAO is we're trying to create a good balance between technocracy and democracy, right, where you can record the experience of a member of staff, you can record their expertise, because you might be better in, say, designing airports compared to designing housing, right? Someone else might be better in designing housing. So, and also to find a balance between allowing less experienced members of staff to contribute to the project and have this kind of freshness that a lot of times young architects have, but at the same time guaranteeing a result in the sense of being productive, right? And we do that with a clever system of voting that might also, within the project structure, end up being what we call a benevolent dictatorship, right? So this is what a leader does, right? They go in and say, well, I have final say. Everybody can, offer decisions, but at the same time, the leader will say, well, this is what we're going to do. And this can be regulated by each team essentially when they're deciding a project, right? Because when you're running a project and you're trying to run it, let's say, fully democratic, you might also arrive at what we call a stalemate of decision making because of too many votes, right? Are we going to vote on ordering coffee for lunch today, or will you arrive at that level of fine tuning everything, right? Probably not, right? You need essentially to arrive at a level where you take decisions on what we say by consensus. And at least in blockchain space, you have the other idea, which is, do you always need to vote, right? You have people creating decentralized autonomous organizations that say, if you arrive at the moment of a voting decision, it means you already have a conflict. Whereas if you are completely aligned in terms of incentives and consensus, you will never need to vote, because through discussion, you will make a decision, right? So you have this kind of two ideas between a kind of traditional architecture studio to a more democratic consensus kind of idea of where you want to take certain things. Now, ArchiDAO doesn't run projects with everybody on board, right? So not all 400 people actually, get to make a decision, right? So when we have a project, you will have specific people running it essentially.
So that's really interesting. So basically, what would it take for an architecture firm that already has a certain structure and is basically structured in that format of leadership and people making decisions on projects, project managing, other people, groups, groups with, we need these groups, etc., etc. Now, what would it take for that sort of traditional structure of an architecture practice to move into blockchain and governance of smart contracts and decentralized?
I think the first step is to decide to take a business into a membership-owned kind of model, right? So the first thing is that, in ArchiDAO, the organization and the output belongs to the members, right? It's not like they belong to me or any of the core members, right? So they belong essentially, let's say, to a smart contract and those that hold essentially keys to that smart contract. But the underlying kind of idea is that it belongs essentially to the workers of the organization. So I think that's key decision, right? And there are architecture companies who are run by their employees, right? They're run by their members. The second thing is to decouple decision making for the organization from decision making for the projects. So in the projects, you will need, when you need to make a decision in terms of technical output and specific design output, you really need more of a hierarchy within that. And that can be kind of created through mimicking or still employing the classic master apprentice kind of idea in the studio. But in terms of the kind of large decision-making approaches in terms of how the organization, for example, should they take more airport projects or should they take more, let's say, housing, social housing projects, right? This is a strategic decision that everybody can vote on. So after decoupling these two and kind of understanding what is going to be the process that is going to be run day to day, then we can kind of map which decisions are going to be taken on chain, so on the blockchain, and which decisions are left to be taken off chain. And that will give you again a kind of approach on what you need to put on a smart contract and what you need to leave out of it. There are elements of cybersecurity as well, right? Smart contracts hold a lot of money, so you need to make them, you need to make their digital architecture robust so that hackers cannot take away your money and so on and so forth. So, but I think these are kind of like the three steps I would look into making that decision. And you obviously need a lot of reading and learning and a lot of education so that people would actually trust the process.
I love that. This is really fascinating. And let's just reiterate the benefits of doing that for the future, for the practice as an architecture sort of organization, but also for the clients.
I think the main, we talked about how you would do it, right? But we didn't talk about why. And I think the main kind of thrust behind actually using blockchain and smart contracts to do this is that you get an industry and projects that are better financially aligned. They are integrated rather than fragmented, and you get a better collaborative scenario, right? What does that mean for the clients? It means essentially that you do not have to handle an industry that is, frankly medieval at certain times in terms of being afraid of getting sued, right? Of being afraid that your job is going to finish and then someone else is going to change the drawings later in the next phase of the project. So you get essentially stakeholders on the project that are better aligned and they will be staying with the project longer compared to having to break down everything into small parts and say, well, you're doing the design. As soon as that's finished, we say bye-bye to you, right? Someone else picks it up. Because that actually introduces a lot of problems in terms of the delivery and the quality in the end. So
And
what we would
as well, who really owns the IP of a project?
well, that's an interesting discussion to be had. One of the things that happens at the moment is that you handle this through contracts, right? And essentially, in many jurisdictions, architects own the IP, but they provide an irrevocable license to their clients to use that. Now, through smart contracts, you can couple or decouple that depending on what you want to do, right? So you can kind of embed the IP on what we call tokens, right? So you can take, for example, the whole BIM model and break that down into tokens that represent the civil engineering part of it, the M&E engineering part of it, the architecture part of it. And through the agreements that you would have, you can then essentially literally take possession and ownership. Well, you can take possession. Ownership is a legal concept, so the jurisdiction needs to allow you to also equate essentially possession of the token with ownership of that.
So interesting.
I have to warn you also that I don't have a law degree, so potentially I might be touching rabbits in certain jurisdictions.
I mean, I think that it's just interesting to know the applicability of it. Of course, to me personally, it's a lot, and it's a lot because it's almost the whole system touches on a lot of different elements. For example, the financials, the ability to be paid on time. There is a lot of restructuring that comes with it, of course. Then we come to the sort of community and the ability to distribute the work amongst the different members that take part in the work production, but also then it has to decision making. It's just so many layers, and I think it's really interesting to see how that functions and the sort of new perspective that offers. I wanted to ask you about, there is certainly a need in the world for decentralized technologies and decentralized decision-making, decentralized contracts to be coming. Therefore, we see a manifestation of that basically through crypto. Perhaps, the old systems and the old models are failing. People are getting tired of it. There is certainly a certain type of anarchism associated to this new movement, hoping of creating a new reality. But what real, let's just say, what real application do you think it holds? Potential does it hold for the future? Because when and I think that it's relevant to compare it to when the internet came about in the 90s. World Wide Web. People were kind of seeing it as this relevant thing. They couldn't understand the implication of connectivity that it offered, of being able to upload a video or a tune online, and what would that mean? And so therefore, a lot of businesses went under, like like Blockbusters, and for example, a lot of also music stores. The way we were selling musics and licenses of music changed dramatically with the internet. With then again movements like Pirate Bay, that in fact was very strong and very active at the time when Spotify came about. So then we would say that Spotify, as an app, as a solution, came out of a time when there was a lot of music being pirate, and the licenses were being illegally shared. People started to protest, and then that was a way to almost order the system around again, and give back the value to musicians and to pay them back for the music. So it's a very interesting thing to see how internet disrupted ways in which we were doing, also took licenses away from artists, and then created chaos, and out of that chaos came new innovation. Right now, almost all of us are subscribed to Spotify or a similar software. Same with Netflix. And we no longer think really where those softwares came from. Those applications came from a massive disruption within the film and the music industry. And I think that, and I guess that's why I'm asking you about the future of it. How serious should we take it? Because sometimes when we are standing in the front of a big revolution, we don't really realize what it implies. Should we pay attention to it, or should we just not? I've certainly leading debates about the metaverse and about those topics. I've invited experts to stage and as well to this podcast to talk about it. And I hear people say, "Oh, this will pass. This is just a trend." But when a technology comes in place and real disruption of the system and almost political disruption, people are rising up and they're creating something that can be unmanageable at some point in respect of saying no to the system, no to what's already existing, to that way of purchasing and confronting under a certain set of rules. And that disruption will bring a new almost a new order around, right? And I think that in a way, when we look at what's happening with crypto, what happened in the fintech world, and what's happening with technology, we are standing in front of a disruption that perhaps we can't fully say where it's going, justify it. But I think personally, it's worth paying attention to, because those kind of moments already happened in history. And they completely reinvented ways in which we're doing. Of course, eventually we accept it and we get on with it and we kind of buy into it, like we bought into an iPhone, Facebook, Spotify, and Netflix, and Uber. However, with all those new technologies, there's definitely been a collapse of the old system. And so I think my question is, how serious is this? And what potential does it have to collapse the way we do business and how we see our industry as a traditional format in which we order things right now? And is there a potential that smart contracts will become an operating system one day? Everyone is going to use them. And how can we prepare for it? Or maybe even, can this influence us to think about the future differently?
Okay, I'll try my best. I mean, this is a lot to take, but I'll try my best to answer, right? I'm obviously biased, right? I've been working on the blockchain space for the past 6 years. So I'll try to answer from as much an unbiased perspective as possible, and I'll give my reasoning for that. So you mentioned two examples of say business model disruption that basically killed entire industries, right? So Netflix and Spotify, right? So for the movies, renting a movie and buying music, right? So I belong to a generation that we had cassettes, right? I don't know if you ever had that kind of idea, right? And then there was also, even though you would buy a record, right? But there was also the culture of sharing your favorite music with your friends, right? Which actually didn't. I mean, in classic fashion, the music industry would see this as a kind of stealing their rights away, but actually they gain more, right? Because more people will know about their product. Then you had this kind of disruption that came from Napster, even before torrents came to be, right? Where essentially what was going on is that you had the technology really ahead of the people building the business models, right? So these were people that basically were coming in saying, "Hey, look at this, right? It offers new possibilities in terms of sharing what is beautiful, right? Music and movies and art." And I think right now what has happened essentially with certain aspects of let's say the Paris industry is that people were offered an alternative that was cheap enough and good enough in terms of speed and accessibility, like Netflix and Spotify, to subscribe to it, right? And basically say, well, I don't need to go and hunt torrents and go blind in terms of what I'm trying to find every time.
Download it on my disk.
Yeah, exactly. It's $12 for a subscription, and then I have everything on that link. But at the same time, that required from Netflix really, I mean, try to find an article to read how they work in terms of instant delivery of the movies, right? Because you'll see that Netflix is not only good in terms of being a let's say cultural company, but also a technological company. How they offer a very good infrastructure for what they're doing. Right. So from my perspective, it is a point of infrastructure, it is a point of changing culture, and it is an acceleration again. So blockchain is also an acceleration of moving things away from the physical space to the digital space. Now, why blockchain came to be, right? Why did people invent it, right? And they basically invented because of the failure of the financial system in 2008, right? The basic motivation behind writing the Bitcoin paper and kind of putting this out was that we saw that even though banks were supposed to be trustworthy and institutions that we would trust them with certain aspects of our lives, they failed. And they failed because they were corrupt, right? So the idea that you have a computer protocol that would handle financial transactions and would be essentially incorruptible came out of that idea. Now, what does that bring to the table, right? It brings to the table the idea that you can design your own economy on a local level, and on a global level, right? So you can build essentially, I don't want to say financial products. I want to say more economies, because that's what we're talking about. I don't care so much about the, being able to, rent, currencies, right? I mean, at least to me personally, it's not exciting, right? Other people get really excited by the idea that they can have decentralized finance. But from my point of view, you can create essentially and design economies that would serve better their stakeholders and the people who participate in that economy. And that is something that I can kind of understand when we're talking now about the system, and we're talking about this kind of anarchistic equity kind of idea of having a stake in the system. And that's where the word stakeholder comes in, right? So yes, I have a stake and I have a decision-making powers in what happens with my life later on. So, taking it from this kind of point of view of acceleration of a shift to the digital space, I think blockchain technologies and subsequently the metaverse as it is connected to that is here to stay. There are a lot of ups and downs in terms of, fast adoption and so on and so forth. We have already seen in the blockchain space decentralized finance rising. We've seen the craziness with NFTs. I would say to people, there is also a lot of fluff attached to this, right? So there, there are scams and Ponzi schemes and people who are not serious enough. I would say to everyone who is trying to be more educated on this, if it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true, right? So there is a lot of work going on behind. In if someone promises you on the internet a get rich fast scheme, they're probably a scam. So you probably need to pay attention to that. But I think there are slowly there is work to be done in terms of there is work done from the research perspective, from the business community. The banks are slowly, even though they're not advertising, they're slowly going into it, right? In terms of offering products on blockchain and crypto. Central banks are offering the kind of centralized equivalent with centralized digital currencies, which I hope people understand is not to their best benefit, because then the central bank would be able to see all of your transactions instantly. And there are implications in there in terms of privacy, in terms of political implications, and so on and so forth. So from my perspective, this technology is going to be here and is going to continue to be really serious and in an ever-growing digitization of our lives. It offers at least an alternative in certain aspects that have to do with social, political, economic equity, and I would even say environmental equity, as it is connected with what local communities do. This is all connected, obviously, with the AEC industry, right? We're like the largest industrial ecosystem in the world is the AEC industry, and from that perspective, I think it will have an effect in terms of combating corruption, making the industry a little bit more efficient, making us, I would even say, making the industry a little bit more honest in terms of what we're offering, and so on and so forth.
This is so fascinating. I mean, all of this is so much to take in, honestly, and so much to think about. I think that certainly we need to allow for all of this to evolve, to learn more about it. There's a lot. It takes a lot of education to see how to better adapt to it. But I do really encourage anyone who's interested, and I see that a bunch of you are watching. If you're guys interested in understanding a little bit more about the economy of the metaverse and using smart contracts and things like that, we have really interesting articles on that, on Disrupt, through Disrupt Symposium that were published in different papers as well. But actually, you can find them on disruptmag.com, which is essentially where all our articles are gathered. There's interviews there with Patrick Schumacher. In fact, also we discuss the economy of the metaverse. We talk a little bit about blockchain, smart contracts, and it's really super interesting always to just open up to communities that already exist that are actually operating within the AEC sector. Those are people that are just like Theo over here, interested in that and building their own communities. And so you don't have to be an expert in that topic to join a community like that and be exposed more to the knowledge and basically the disruption that is coming with this technology. So I'm just gonna drop the Discord link again over here. If you guys are interested, you can join the ArchiDAO community, and the community that is going to take care of your education. You can ask questions and see how all of that disruption, that technology can apply directly to you, to your firm, to you as an architect, and maybe the future of your career, of how you get paid, smart contracts, and all that stuff, because there's a lot to learn for us. And also, if you wanted to get in touch with Theo, perhaps Theo, you can tell people where to find you.
Well, Google is the easiest one. I can also give you my email address at the university directly, which would be the easiest way someone can contact me. I won't give my handle on Discord. They can find out. I don't go by my name, so. And you can also take a look at the book we've written on blockchain for construction with my dear colleague Davide Lombardi.
Yes, perhaps you share with us the screen and show us some of the things we agreed to. You share with us.
Yep.
I'm going to take your email off of here, and then let's do that. Because Theo is writing research papers with the university and also as an academic on those topics that we're discussing. So I think that that's a great resource as well for those of you that want to deep dive into it in a more professional academic manner, rather than just being fed by podcasts and discussions like this. This is your opportunity to deep dive into it and understand more.
So the book is called Blockchain for Construction. We edited with Dr. Davide Lombardi, who works at Liverpool University. It has 11 chapters, from the promise of blockchain for the construction industry by Jens Huchenwitz, to DAOs, to integration of BIM with payments, and so on and so forth. I know it's a little bit expensive if you try to buy it, but if you have access to a university account, you can download it. If you need a copy and you don't have any access to it, just email me and I'll try to give you a copy. Then another paper that I think you can read is our journal paper at the International Journal of Architectural Computing. So our paper is called Framework for Decentralized Architectural Design, BIM and Blockchain Integration. It's open access, so you don't need any accounts to read it directly. And another thing you can do is you can go to ResearchGate, and you can create a really free account. And then if you follow me, you can download all of my papers.
That's wonderful. Excellent.
So that's kind of like the easiest way you can deal with that. Or if you go and Google my name along with the word blockchain, you'll probably get a lot of PDFs that you can download. But yeah, happy to have a chat with anyone who has any questions. We try to provide as much of our research content open access when possible, obviously. Yeah, and happy to have any kind of discussion in the future.
Sounds amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's also great that we have some reference to go and read academic papers on it. I think that you guys are interested in this and potentially want to be early adopters, or you see a potential in it to explore as an architect. Joining groups like ArchiDAO is probably your best bet, because you're going to be surrounded by people that are also exploring it together. You'll see what is trendy where this is going. You can be part of debates and learn from one another, and it's probably the best way to get involved today, since this is still emerging technology, right? It's been around for not so long in the mainstream, perhaps a little bit longer within academia. Theo probably knows about it, because you say it's been 6 years. For me, it's been 6 months rather than 6 years, but it all depends on when we've come across those topics. And certainly last year with NFT, metaverse, and blockchain, there's been more and more talk about it in the art and architecture space. But yeah, it's true. It's there, and I don't think it's going anywhere, because technology is only advancing and developing. And whether or not we're going to be using it today or in 5 years, it's inevitable that in some way it's going to be impacting our everyday career, way we do things, and the way we work, and how we're going to do it in the future. So perhaps early adoption is a way to go about it, and it's always open as an opportunity to you to explore. Theo, thank you so much for joining me. This was a wonderful conversation. I've learned a lot.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for everyone who tuned in, and we'll see you guys all soon at the next Architecture Talk Tank. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.